How do you give feedback that lands and sticks and gets the results you want? Today, we'll talk about those 5 elements that really make feedback effective. Welcome back to the art and science of difficult conversations, where we believe when we communicate better, we live better. As always, I'm Chris. I'm here. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm always as joined by Lucie. Lucie, how are you today?
I am pretty good, Chris. Thank you. I want to live better.
You want to live better.
So that's why we are here.
It's all we do here is trying to live better, communicate better.
Absolutely. How are you doing today?
So far, so good. I've been thinking about this for the past week, and um, I think our podcast name is really good and descriptive. I do sometimes wish it was shorter.
Yeah, I hear you.
I wish it was shorter and there was like a catchy acronym we can use for it,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't
So,
think that there's a better one yet.
so if any of you has ideas, let us know.
Here's a tidbit for everybody. If you've never heard us tell this before, but the Art and Science of Difficult Conversations title was really just a placeholder at first. And we said, that sounds like an okay name, but we'll keep it there for now so we can keep building stuff and recording, and then we'll think of a better name later. Spoiler alert, we never thought of a better name. We just kept using it. So here we are.
So we might change it in the future, and you could have input in it. Make it a
Something to consider.
competition.
Yeah, something to consider. So today we are going to talk about something that I don't think there's a number on the limit of articles and books and discussions that people have had about this topic. And we're going to add our hat into the ring of having a podcast episode about it. But I've listened to lots of episodes about it. I've gone to trainings on how
Mm.
to do this. And it seems to be definitely an art and a science to this as well. But how do you give feedback that gets the results you want out of giving that feedback? Now, Lucie and I have been either giving feedback or we've been coaching others to give feedback for quite a while. And so we've come up with, as we've kind of brainstormed and thought about this, we've come up with these 5 really important keys that every bit of feedback you give needs to have in order to have an impact. And so, could you miss one of these things? Yeah, you could still have an effect. We're just saying that these are the 5 that if you have them together, you're going to really increase the probability of success with your feedback. Is that fair to say, Lucie?
I think so. And I would say if you don't have the time, if you're overwhelmed and busy like everybody else nowadays, and you don't have the time right now or the bandwidth to read the books, listen to our episode because if you follow at least these 5 steps, it really increases the chances that your communication will be better, will be more effective, will be received better, and you will have more enjoyable moments in your work and in your
Oh,
life
yeah.
as a result. Who wouldn't want
Now,
that?
I want to be clear, set the framework first, is or the context. When we are talking about feedback in this context, we are talking about as if you are a manager giving feedback to your employee. I will say this, that this approach can work with any kind of situation. You could use it giving feedback up or sideways or to anybody. You just have to modify it a little bit, but the framework and the basic structure is still there. So let's jump into it before we really dive into it. Let me tell you all 5 so you don't think that we're just kind of holding out on you. So the things you need to 5 keys to success here are: number 1, you have to have a framework and a plan of how you're going to give that framework. You can't wing it. You have to know exactly what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. Secondly, you need to be concrete, be specific, and have data if necessary. Third, you want to be able to manage yourself. You got to be in a calm place if you want to get to that, be able to give that feedback. Number 4, timing and location is everything. They will make a big world of difference in terms of how the feedback is received. And the 5th one, you got to add an accountability structure. Just giving somebody feedback is only half the equation. You have to have another part where have some sort of accountability follow up. So let's dive into it. Number 1, have a framework and have a plan of how to give that feedback. Now, I there's so many different models out there. There's the ABC model, SBI model, countless other models. Lucie, what model are you usually typically following?
I like the SBI feedback model, which says situation, describe what is the situation, give the context for that feedback. Then behavior, what is the behavior that you're observing, which helps with us when we are not giving assumptions. We are not saying, you are this way and I need you to be different. No, this is the observable, objective behavior that's being observed. You didn't fill out the form last time or twice this time, which comes together also give the data. You need to have data, so you provide specific observable behavior. Then the next step is for I, impact. What is the impact on you? What is the impact on the project? What is the impact on the team? What is the impact on anybody else who is involved? Which again is making it more objective rather than pointing fingers, but really owning when this happens, the impact on me is I need to then stay longer at work and work for 2 extra hours. Then I'm late for my family with my kids. I don't know, it could be. Or the impact is we are delayed. We're risking being delayed with the payroll, say. And then there's the impact on everybody else because they're getting paid 1 day later, which for some people can make a big difference.
Mhm.
They could be
Yeah.
upset, let's say, providing that type of feedback. What really is the impact? Which the impact on that when we provide feedback from this way, when we are saying this is the impact on me, this is the impact on the team, we are not blaming. It doesn't seem more as a blame. It's really sharing what is from our perspective. This is the
Mhm.
impact. And then usually to follow that, what's coming up for you when you hear this? Is that also from your end, how this is showing up? Or so have a question, ask for more details, their perspective, or have a request. You know, this there is a standard. We need to meet that standard. How can we partner together? What can we do together to get there? Something needs to change. What can we do together to change that?
Yeah.
And then from that, collaborate. Be your
Yeah.
approach that you're using.
Hey, well, I was just thinking as you were sharing that, I've seen that model so many times, and they call the SBI model, but really it's the SBICRC model. Like, there's lots more things that happen after you talk about the impact.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, the thing I use, I don't actually even have a name for it. I learned it in a training long ago, and it's very
Mhm.
similar to SBI. It's just 3 steps, but it's very straightforward. You just talk about what they did that's correct or incorrect, what the impact of that behavior is, and then what you want them to do differently in the future.
Yeah.
Just those 3 steps. And then if it's a coaching conversation or you want to have a coaching conversation, like that's meant to be like you just walk by, let me give you this 30-second feedback. I need to tell you to do this differently. But if you're having
Yeah.
a longer conversation, then after you tell them the impact of that or the consequence of that behavior, then you ask them for their input. Have you noticed that? What's coming up for you? And then you talk about what are we going to do going forward. So it's very similar.
It is.
You can kind of modify it however you need to, and you know
Exactly.
you could do it for positive feedback too. If Lucie, you just
Absolutely.
facilitated a workshop and you knocked it out of the park and you did an incredible job, I'm going to say, Lucie, in that workshop you just did, some of the activities you ran, you were able to get people who are introverted to share. You're able to get everybody's input together, and you really deliver an experience where everybody was learning. This is
Mhm.
going to be something that's impactful for them, and they're going to take back to their work. I don't need to tell you to do anything differently because you just did it. So that's it. Just
Yeah.
keep doing those
You
things.
can ask me questions.
Yeah, I can ask you questions,
Or you don't need
but
to
yeah, it
any,
works
you just
for
can start with SBI and that's it. Yeah.
right. Yeah, so you can obviously just use it for positive and negative feedback, but
Yeah.
if you're listening, you can see it doesn't even matter which one you use. They're very similar. All of them are very similar. They're all kind of
Absolutely.
just
Yeah.
doing their thing, right? It's really about you got to know what you need to say. And so, and then part of that leads into the second one. You got to have specific data and be specific. When you're giving feedback, if you've ever heard, I need you to be more assertive. or you need to stop being rude, right? Those kind of things we think are descriptive, but the problem is everybody interprets them differently.
It's more of a judgment rather than
It's a
description.
judgment.
Yeah,
Right, exactly. And so you might say, but I wasn't rude in that meeting. I thought I was just stating what I needed to say. I just was
exactly.
saying my piece. So
I'm being honest.
I'm being honest. I'm not being rude. And so you need to focus on specific concrete behaviors, right? So
Yeah.
thinking about instead of saying you were rude, saying, Lucie, in that meeting, you interrupted Tom multiple times while he was trying to answer a question, while he was trying to share. Right. That's the specific behavior that's very clear. There's no getting around that. Right. So when you're thinking about that, Lucie, when you're thinking about being concrete and specific, what else are you thinking about?
I would say it empowers the conversation in a way that it eliminates the gray area and misunderstanding. So it helps people to really get on the same page with what happened and what is the impact of that. And without
Mm-hmm.
specific data, I know some leaders, they're uncomfortable sharing the specific negative feedback, and they package it so well that the person, they thought they gave hints of the behavior, but the
Mm-hmm.
other person, without having the specific tangible data, they think they're just doing fine. So the specific data can provide really also the ground for accountability in the future too.
Right. Right. And it takes that out of your personal judgment of you just don't
Absolutely.
like the way they're doing something into no, you actually are doing this.
Yeah,
Right. Like, and it's easier for people to wriggle out of or minimize something if you can't prove it, right? If you say, Lucie, you've been late multiple times over the past week. Well, when was I late?
yeah,
Just a couple of times. I think I was only late once. Like I can admit that I was late once. But if I have like specific data saying, hey, based on the clock in times, you were late last Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and yesterday, you can't wriggle out of that because I have data, and we don't even have to argue about
exactly.
the data. We could say this is the facts. That we're not going to argue about whether it's true or not. This is what happened.
True. Yeah. So it already moves the conversation forward rather than being stuck at, oh, that is not true. Give me the data, give me the proof.
Exactly, exactly. So
Which takes extra effort or might take extra effort on the leaders' side to really be organized themselves. Or maybe have a Google document with each employee and put notes and
right.
feedback there. Because all of us, we can forget what we wanted to say, or so really be also diligent with our own and keeping track record.
Yeah. Although I guess
And
now
from,
that's
okay, yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, as we talk about this example, now I'm thinking, why did you let this go for so long if they were late for four times?
That's true too, yes. But it can happen. So let's say if you
It
haven't
can
had
happen.
those conversations before, this is the podcast for you.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
start tracking it. Create that, get a notebook or a Google document on your computer or some file where you can put your notes. Of
Right,
course, keep them private.
right, right, right. And I think that's also helpful to even for you as a manager to conceptualize, is this important enough for me to give this feedback?
Yes,
If I like love black pen ink, but you keep writing in blue pen ink, is it really that important that I'm writing all this
it's
down? As I'm
not.
writing it down and thinking about the impact, I'm like, actually, it doesn't really matter. It's annoying. Like I just like black pen ink better, but it might not be that important. And so maybe you don't need to give feedback after all.
It also makes me think when we write things down, another benefit, it could be looking at the balancing positive and negative feedback
Mm, yeah,
and intentionally see
yeah,
if you can find also things that you can give positive feedback on.
mm, yeah. I think that's fair
Because
for sure.
just if the employee only gets the negative feedback, what could be the impact on that employee?
Yeah. This is making me think. A side note: what do you think about the feedback sandwich?
Could work in some situations. let's say when there's positive, negative, positive. It could be tricky for those leaders that are so super nice. They sandwich it
Mm,
so well
yeah.
that the person leaves away from that feeling, they're doing fine. Yeah, there were some small things, but it really doesn't matter because there's so many other things they're doing well. So I
Yep.
see the
Yep. Yep.
possible risk in that.
Yeah. I'm not a
What
fan
if,
of it. I
yeah.
I, I heard this analogy a long time ago and it stuck with me ever since that when you're eating a sandwich, you're not
Hmm.
eating a bologna bread sandwich. You're eating a bologna sandwich, right? It's the middle part that's really the most
Good one.
important. And
Yes,
by doing that, you risk diluting the message of what you're
exactly.
trying to send if you're too nice.
Yep.
Or if you have an employee that maybe you weren't nice, maybe you were very straightforward and did everything the way you were supposed to, but the employee just heard the good thing at the end and said, you know what, I guess
Yeah,
I'm doing pretty well. This is great.
exactly. Yeah.
Got some stuff
So
to work on, but yeah, I'm knocking it out of the park.
so that could be tricky. Yeah. So maybe
So
balancing it out, give clear positive feedback, and then find times to also for constructive feedback when necessary.
yeah, I had an employee when she like when I first worked with her, like when we started, I asked her, what's how do you like to receive feedback? She actually requested the feedback sandwich. She's like, I actually like, positive, negative feedback, positive. And I talked to her about it. I said, listen, I'm happy to give you positive feedback with that critical feedback. That makes sense. I'm not opposed to that. I don't think this sandwich works the way you want it to. And we talked about like why she wanted it that way and all reasonable things, reasons why she wanted it that way. So I don't want to discount like her reasonings for it. So we were able to agree, let's do this positive and negative at the same time. We won't, it's never going to be all negative. It's going to be, a balance, which I agreed with. It's fine to do a balance.
Yeah.
So,
And
but
what
having
I
that
love
conversation,
what I love about your approach really also getting on the same page and getting an agreement about and permission to provide the feedback and what kind of feedback works for them.
yeah,
That could be very empowering for the employees. So they already know, yeah, there's going to be feedback. And that feedback, if we create that safety, that the feedback is not you are a horrible employee and you're doomed forever, or you will never get a promotion if you make one mistake. But this feedback, this constructive feedback is my way of supporting you because I want you to be successful.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So really also making sure that the perception of the feedback, that we position it in a way as this is a way of support, not a punishment.
Right. And speaking of how we're packaging that feedback leads into our next point, which is managing yourself. And this is actually the reason why we're even doing this is because that last podcast recording we did, we went to a tangent a little bit about there's often a lot of people who are really nice. They don't want to give too critical of feedback because they had a lot of critical managers themselves. So they don't want to repeat that. Fair. And so now they are stuck in I want to be nice, but I still need to give the feedback that gets
Yeah.
things done. And so with that, this is what you really are passionate about. What are you thinking about in terms of managing ourselves and reframing how we even think about feedback?
That reframe can be really helpful looking at when somebody's value is being a kind person. I want to be kind, empathetic person towards others. And that's the leader I want to be. I really want to ask questions and listen and be kind because I don't want to be like my previous leader who was really harsh with everybody. And that's why I left the company. I had clients telling me that.
Mm,
And now they're faced with, yeah, but this employee, they are not really getting my feedback. And I feel I need to be telling them the things that I don't want to say because I still want to have a good relationship. I still want to be a nice person. I don't want to be mean. And I feel if I
right.
am afraid, if I tell them that, it's going to be like I'm being mean to them. So we really explore what is the impact if the employee doesn't get the feedback. What are the possible consequences of that? Well, the problem never gets fixed. The leader might get additional work on their plate, especially if they're
Mm-hmm.
already overwhelmed. So it can lead
Mm-hmm.
to their even burnout down the road, possibly being resentful and additional stress. because they know they should have the conversations, but they are avoiding it. So the discomfort, emotional cost on their well-being, cost on for the company, maybe increased mistakes can have impact on other departments in the company or the projects, could be financial impact,
Mm.
and also the impact on the growth of the person. Well, if they feel they or think they are doing great, there's nothing wrong, they will never be motivated, incentivized to grow or change. And so
Yeah.
is that really helping? Is that being kind to them? Really? Or
Mm.
would that really actually support them if they receive that feedback so they can change? One of my recent sessions was the person was worried if she gives the person feedback, unless something changes, he's not going to get the next contract. And she didn't want to give him the feedback. Um, and then she realized, well, if he gets the feedback, then yes, he might quit right away. And yeah, then we get somebody else. Or if he gets the feedback and then he really wants to keep that job, that gig, that project going for another contract, then it can motivate him to change. And
Mm.
all of us can benefit. And he will have the opportunity to continue having income through our company. So she realized, well, if I really want to serve him and support him, which I really want, I need to give him the feedback, even though it's uncomfortable for me.
Mm. Mm. Love that insight.
And so really reframing that
Yeah.
for ourselves. Is that being kind to them when we are keeping them in the dark in a way?
Right. Right.
Or is it
Yeah.
robbing them from the opportunity to grow?
That's a powerful reframe. I think that's absolutely right. It's I think we're trying to protect people from
Mm-hmm.
certain things, but really we're trying to protect ourselves,
Yeah.
right, from any potential negative reactions.
Mm-hmm. So it's about also preparing ourselves emotionally
Yeah.
for, okay, what if they get frustrated? Okay, so how do I keep myself calm while they're going through the emotions? And they have the right to feel however they are feeling.
That's
How
right.
can we reaffirm them that this is because we want to support them and have
Yeah.
that trusting relationship?
Right. Right. Yeah. It's not our job to manage other people's emotions.
Exactly. And so that also the distinction, what is my responsibility? Am I responsible for their emotions, or am I responsible just for my own right now and managing my own so I can stay calm, even when it's uncomfortable, so I can stay centered and really say what I need to say?
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I don't have anything to add to that. I think that makes sense.
So I think then we can go to the next point.
Yeah. Timing and location is everything.
Mm,
I think obviously location, you want to give feedback in a place. I think if a lot of people are taught give praises in public, criticisms in private. I think that's fair. I think that's what the kind of team dynamic you want to create is you don't want to be giving this really, you can give positive feedback in public, go for it. You want to give critical feedback or constructive feedback in private because there's a lot of emotions and you don't want to get people defensive about it. You want them to be able to listen, right?
yeah,
Unless it's very urgent that you give that specific 30-second feedback, right? Like a safety issue
yeah,
or something that's really dangerous, you need to give that feedback immediately.
right
Don't worry
away.
about everybody else. But outside of that, talk about that stuff privately so you don't have to worry about people's emotions and you won't be interrupted. And timing, we were talking about timing ahead of this because we agree timing is everything, right? So when you think about feedback, giving specific feedback, what are you thinking about in terms of how soon to give that feedback?
If something happens within the weekend, we have weekly one-on-ones, one-to-ones, I would say that could be an opportunity to provide regular feedback. What's going
Mm-hmm.
well? What's working well? What might use some tweaks? What might need to change? So giving regular feedback in those one-to-one meetings could be beneficial. Again, if that's safety issue, as soon as possible.
Mm.
You mentioned a great
Yep.
example if somebody's giving a workshop for the full day when we're preparing for this before recording. true. If they're exhausted at the end of the day, they might not be in the right mental space to receive
Right.
a comprehensive feedback on how the workshop went.
Yeah.
So that might not be the best timing and space for that. So also really making sure that the other person is also in that right space and they do have the time, that you have the time for that feedback. It's not
Right.
like in the hallway, you give them feedback when people can pass by, but really having a private space. There was one thing, maybe you saw me making a face, because that reminded me when you were sharing, give positive feedback publicly, negative constructive feedback privately. For some people, even the positive public feedback could be triggering for them, especially if they're
Mm,
very introverted. It might create
fair.
very uncomfortable feelings in them.
Great point. Fair point. That's fair.
So that could be, to your point previously, really when you have your team, have the conversation how they like to receive feedback, even a positive feedback.
Yeah. Yeah,
I,
absolutely.
do they love to be acknowledged in front of others? Some people, yes, please, anytime. Some people, no, really. I would love to hear the positive feedback, but let's keep it in our meetings, please. Because I
Mm,
really don't want, I feel very uncomfortable being on the spotlight.
yeah. I think that's worth another discussion because then you risk by not even acknowledging it in public, you risk other people saying, well, why doesn't Lucie acknowledge Chris's good work?
Mm,
Like,
that's a
if
good
I'm
one.
if
The
I'm
team environment.
right, so like I think that gets into like that hard part of like team dynamics is
Yes.
yes, that makes I agree with like, yeah, it makes sense. Let's
On a
let's have
personal
if
level. Yeah.
yeah, if you want to be personal, let's have it one on one. Let's talk about I'll save it for that. It becomes a little bit hard now. Like, what kind of tone are you setting for the rest of the team? And so then I would have that conversation. It's like I'd like to still acknowledge that you did this.
Yes.
We don't have to dwell on it. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it. What's a good way I can do that without kind of putting you out?
Fantastic. Love it. Kind of getting an
So
agreement for what works for everybody, what's motivating for
yeah,
them and
exactly.
the
But
team.
yeah, I think there's also a risk if you don't acknowledge in public, right? Maybe not
Great
giving the
point. I
feedback, but
agree.
you should still
Yes.
acknowledge, right?
Great point. Yes.
So the last thing is adding accountability structures. I think this is the one that I think a lot of people miss. And even
Mm.
if they don't want to miss it, they don't know how to do it. And so it's really thinking about it's not adding in accountability measures is really vital. Nobody disagrees with like having accountability. Everybody, there's plenty of trainings and workshops on how to increase accountability.
True.
And adding in accountability measures after the fact is very hard. It's very difficult because life gets in the way. And so, my favorite question when I ask this or when I coach anybody to do this is as soon as you've come up with a plan of what's the next step, you're going to do this, or we all agree you're going to do this next step.
Yeah.
The question I have everybody ask is, what do you want to do if it doesn't work? What do you think we
I like
should
that.
do if that doesn't work? Whatever
Mm.
variation of that is, it doesn't really matter. It's just you want to talk ahead of time what happens, right? And so
Uh,
I've had a leader ask or feel hesitant of asking that because they asked, but aren't we like setting them up for failure, or aren't we assuming they're going to fail at this? And the answer is no, right? The answer is you are just assuming something might get in the way. It might be they
okay.
just don't do it, which is possible. Let's talk about like what happens if you just don't do it. Maybe we have to go to HR, or life gets in the way, right? Like maybe there's a lot of personal things going on that prevent you from doing this. What do you want to do? How do you want to address this? And so coming up with that collaboratively ahead of time can help you create that accountability measure. Like, okay, well, let's check in 2 weeks and see how things are going. Or I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know if I can really make it. Can we check in next week to make sure I'm on track here? But talking about it right then and there while it's still fresh and you've gotten agreement on the next step, that can really
Absolutely.
solve a lot of headaches ahead of time. But
I agree.
what's your way of adding accountability structures?
I agree. Agreeing on the next steps. Um, Often it could be even so having them come up with the next steps
Mm, yep.
rather than the leader saying, I think you should do this, 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 to get a buy-in from the person and which is increased accountability. What is possible? What do you think could be the next steps? And having them think through, and maybe asking them what do you think could get in the way? What would be the support for you to, or steps to prevent this getting in the way? Or when that gets in the way, what would be the steps to address that? And plan for, okay, scenario 1, scenario 2 if needed. And again, figure out, okay, when do we need the next step for us, our conversation? Where do we review? Could be having a structure when we meet next. I would love to know first what worked well. What do you want to celebrate? Let's celebrate first, start on the positive note, and then let's explore anything that got in the way. How can we, what kind of support do you need to move forward?
Yeah, the ongoing follow-up. I think that's key,
Yeah.
right? I think that's why I think project management is one of those skills that every leader needs to have to some degree.
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't need a certification, but you need to know how to manage a project, which is all of this. Everything we talked about is how do you manage that project? How do you set up milestones and how do you set in regular check-ins? I think that's key. I think that's a great point. Is how do you continually follow up and celebrate the successes and things that need to be course corrected along the way, right? Not just waiting for let's talk about this next year at your performance review.
Exactly. Well, I gave you the feedback, so now you should know what to do.
Yeah, now you just do it, right?
Exactly.
One scenario I'm wondering, Lucie, this comes up before is a leader is in a meeting and a leader from a different team, maybe a different VP, comes up to me and says, let's say you report to me and says, hey, Chris, Lucie did this in a meeting. It was really messed up or, really inappropriate, whatever. So essentially implying that I need to give you feedback about something that this other VP or this other leader saw in a meeting.
Yeah.
How do you approach that? Or how do you kind of navigate that?
That's a tricky one. Depending on the relationship and among, that's a good question. I would say, again, looking at, is this really important? Having the feedback first with the VP, seeing, really understanding what happened, getting the data. And then using the, let's say, SBI to provide that this is the situation, this is the meeting, this is the behavior that's been observed, this is the impact. What can we do? What's going on? What's your perspective on that? What is your side of the story? This is what I've heard. I want to also know your side of the story, of the situation.
Yeah.
And see how can we figure this out, because we need to all work together. And what would be the next steps? Do you want to talk directly? Is there any change needed? Is the feedback, does it?
That's fair. Yeah.
How would you approach this?
I've had the leaders, or I've always told leaders, don't give that feedback because you weren't there. You don't know really what was happening.
Yeah.
But I think like you, I would ask that VP or the other leader, anybody, I would just get more details. Like, can you describe more what happened?
Yeah.
If they really feel bold, they can also ask the other leader, that sounds like it was really terrible or really difficult. That's tough. What did they say when you gave them that feedback? And then you're basically implying that they should have given that feedback because they saw it directly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird to be put in that position.
Difficult to
And
navigate. Yeah.
difficult to navigate. I'd say just ask like, what do you want me to do with this information? Because I wasn't there, so how could I give this feedback?
Exactly.
I always find it weird. How can you give feedback that you weren't there to see, unless it was so detailed and you like have a very clear idea of what happened?
Yeah.
But a lot of times, it's again like those. Most people are giving you that secondhand knowledge of like, hey, this person was rude during that meeting, but what does that mean? And how often did it happen?
Exactly.
And how big was it? Like, or that person was unprofessional. Like I need more
Another feedback.
details.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Yes.
need like details that'll help me because
Yeah.
otherwise I can't give that feedback. Even if I wanted to, even if I was like, even if I agreed this person shouldn't be unprofessional. What do they need to do differently? I have no idea what to tell them.
It can be tricky, and it depends on the relationship we have. Some people are more comfortable and the specific details. Sometimes it is important that the person, let's say if they were giving a workshop and in that workshop, some things happened and maybe the VP will never interact with them ever again. Yeah, the behavior could be concerning for the overall performance of that person.
Right. Right.
So that we gather data, and that could be part of that conversation. And of course, make sure that we gather data from them, what's happened for them from their perspective.
Right.
And not siding with anybody, but really being more of that curious, non-judgmental state. I want to know what happened. I'm here to support you. What was your side of the story?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So there we have it. We have those 5 big key strategies. Number 1, have a framework or a plan of how to give that feedback. Number 2, be concrete and have the data if necessary. Number 3, manage yourself, your own expectations, your own emotions, your own frame, how you're even framing that feedback to yourself. Number 4, recognize that timing and place is everything. So get the right timing, get the right place. And then 5, add accountability structures. Find the way to make sure you're holding them accountable, because I don't know, it's hard for people to hold themselves accountable. Like, how many people create New Year's goals and don't follow through on them?
True, it's one of the biggest obstacles and challenges, yeah. And also set the boundary possibly. If this doesn't happen, if this doesn't change, it could be part of the accountability conversation, really setting the boundary, sharing the consequences.
Right, exactly. So that's it. There we have it. Those 5 things. I think those are the keys that have always helped me when I'm giving feedback, to make sure the feedback goes over well. Like Lucie mentioned before, they're not always gonna be happy with that feedback, right? But that's not the goal, right? If you are telling them all the things they've done wrong, I don't know, everybody's gonna be like, I'm super happy you told me all this. Like, most people would feel some sort of way about it, even if they're like glad to get feedback and move in a positive direction. Still doesn't feel great to everybody. No. So it's all really about, how do you get the results you need? How do you move things forward and be kind and clear and compassionate by giving that feedback?
Absolutely. And I would say be kind also long term, rather than kind at the moment. Well, for now, let's just feel good for this today.
Yeah.
But is that strategically being kind, strategically long term for that person?
Yep.
Is that kindness really kindness?
Yeah.
So checking in with ourselves.
So there you have it. A little bit different than our regular episodes, only because we don't do a role play, because we've been giving you examples all along. So, but let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Either email us or comments and let us know below. Did we miss something? Are we wrong? Do you feel like we just need to be more direct? And we talk about this all the time, is it depends a lot on the relationship too.
True.
Right. Some of the bosses I've had that I've been with them for 4 years or more, we get to a pretty good rhythm where they can just tell me what's up. And I understand, I know what needs to happen next. We don't need to have a long sit down discussion about like what the next steps are, because we've already gone through that. We have a good sense of like a good flow of what happens next. But if you're still building that routine, or if you're still trying to figure things out, then it might take a little bit more time for sure.
And if you are dealing with a situation at work right now and you have some concerns about giving that feedback, let us know. Email us, message us. We can role play the scenario for you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Lucie. As always a pleasure. Thank you for everybody listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, engage, talk, do whatever. But we hope to see you next week's episode.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everybody, for listening, and see you next time.